In our household, we've been trying with varying degrees of success to teach our 3- and 5-year-old how to have dinner conversation. Now, this is partly because we think it's a really important skill to have, partly because we just want them to sit with us long enough to get even half our dinner eaten, and partly because it is the one moment we have each day where we're all together in one place and at least vaguely still. The question, "How was your day?" often gets one-word answers, so I've taken to asking instead for each person to share the best part of their day. This will usually get at least a full sentence out of each person, so maybe 6 bites of dinner for me. Now, usually we're trying to balance out demands to go play and complaints that we didn't make pasta, so focusing on the positive makes sense. But I have had a couple moments lately where I have wondered if we need a second question that acknowledges that there may have been hard parts of the day as well. After all, one of the things that all those experts out there who like to talk about how we parent these days say is how important it is to let our kids have hard feelings, to validate that all feelings are okay. And isn't that also what I'm always trying to tell you all here? That it's okay to have a hard day, to show up sad or mad or frustrated, that this too is a part of having an authentic life. I find that these days there are often kind of 2 modes of being in our world. We've got the incessantly positive and the incessantly negative. Have you noticed this? Neither of these really serves us well, because life is so much more complicated than that. I've been bullet journaling for almost a year now, and one of the things I take time to write down each day is at least one high and one low of the day. And I found this to be a really helpful and grounding practice for me because it helps me find the balance in my days. Even on the really hard days, I can pick out something that was good. And even on the really good days, there's always something that was hard. I find the same sort of balance exists when it comes to the mysteries of our world. That song we just heard from Dylan and the poem that Sonrisa read both speak to the ways in which mystery can be awe-inspiring. We've all had those experiences of looking up at the stars, pondering the mystery of the universe and how big it might be, and feeling wonder at the very fact of our existence in the midst of this enormous cosmos that little us exist. The magic of our world is that there is always more for us to discover, more to learn. We will probably never fully understand all the mysteries of the universe, and each new discovery seems to bring yet more wonder into our world, to make the fact that we are here and alive, and our world is here and alive, seem an even more incredible thing. We heard one story of this in the Wonder Box that Sadie shared. Snowflakes, a pretty amazing thing to begin with, become even more wondrous when they are magnified, when you could see their full intricacy and beauty. When we ponder the mysteries of the world, it is often true that wonder and awe arise, that we experience a wow moment. And yet at the same time, not all the mysteries of the world are awe-inspiring in a good way. There are plenty of things that we don't understand about the world that are downright scary. There are mysteries about what makes the world so beautiful, but there are also mysteries about what makes the world so hard. The question of evil is central to this. Why do bad things happen in such a beautiful world? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do people do bad things to one another? This is the question of theodicy, the fancy theological word for why bad things happen, for this problem of evil. For centuries now, theologians and philosophers have been grappling with the fact that evil exists and the mystery of why. It's been the subject of countless books, articles, and debates. And the reality is that even with all that we understand about the world, we don't fully understand it. The best we can do, perhaps, is to say that the world is chaotic and unpredictable, and that things are happening, good and bad, all the time, indiscriminately. That is not a particularly satisfying answer, of course, and it doesn't even begin to touch on the question of why people do bad things. I know that sometimes when I read the news, I am awestruck in a bad way. I cannot even fathom some of the horrors that people inflict on each other, the hatred and the violence. I've certainly felt that way about the news coming out of Israel and Gaza over the last 2 months. The conflict there is a nasty one, born of generations of trauma on both sides. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the treatment of hostages and prisoners, the ever-climbing toll of dead and injured, the pain and the suffering takes my breath away. Despite having studied the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in seminary and having a good sense of the history and reasons for it, I nonetheless feel like I cannot fully understand what makes people do these things to one another. Even if we chalk it up to trauma, what is it that makes some people respond to trauma with growth and others with violence? Why can some people break out of generational patterns while others remain stuck? The truth is that there has been hatred and violence in our world as long as there have been humans, and we seem to be no closer to figuring out how to get rid of it. We are simply left to live with this great balance of mysteries. The awe-inspiring beauty and wonder of the world on the one hand, and the terrifying pain and suffering on the other. The 8 days of Hanukkah started just a few days ago, and I spent a lot of time this year thinking about how I could talk about Hanukkah in the midst of a renewed conflict in Gaza. It seemed incongruous to celebrate a Jewish military victory in this moment. For that is a piece of the story. The temple had been desecrated, and after a successful revolt, the Maccabees retook control of the temple and needed to rededicate it. Though there was only enough oil to last for 1 day, it miraculously lasted for 8 days. Exactly the amount of time it took to get more oil. The story that is told in this way is based on a successful reconquering of land that once belonged to the Israelites. And that is a really hard narrative to want to lift up right now. But I have appreciated learning from the Jewish community, both locally and nationally, about what wisdom we might find from Hanukkah in this moment. I had a conversation earlier this week with Rabbi John Spirasavet of Temple Beth Abraham here in Nashua, who reminded me that the Hanukkah story is actually in the middle of a war, not at the end, which felt like a really helpful reframe. Perhaps then this story is not so much about a military victory as it is about finding hope in the midst of war and turmoil, in which case it is certainly a story that we all need in this moment. The progressive Jewish organization, If Not Now, which is organizing events this year called Hanukkah for Ceasefire, wrote this about celebrating Hanukkah right now. During Hanukkah, we remember a time of miracles, of light shining through the horror, even when it feels impossible. On that first night, our ancestors lit their menorah, not knowing what would happen the next night. And then the impossible happened again and again. This Hanukkah, they say, we come together to create light, say that every life is sacred, and remain grounded in humanity, even in the face of all the violence and despair. To fight for a future of freedom and safety for Palestinians, Israelis, and all people. This centuries-old story of a miracle, a mystery, is perhaps not about powerful victors of war celebrating, but instead about those little things that can bring us hope when we need it the most. And isn't this just like that great balance of mysteries? The beauty and wonder of the world can take our breath away. And at the same time, the weight of the pain and suffering in the world can feel so heavy that it can take our breath away too. This world is, on the one hand, full of incomprehensible beauty and life, and on the other hand, full of terror and fear. So how do we catch our breath in the midst of it all? What is it that keeps us steady? I wonder if it is those beautiful mysteries that help us make it through the terrifying ones. Perhaps it is those moments of awe and wonder that help us to make it through, that remind us that there is still hope, that this world and our existence on it is still worth fighting for. In an essay written last year for Hanukkah, Rabbi John offered this beautiful reinterpretation of the Hanukkah miracle. He writes, "In recent years, I've come to understand that the real miracle is that someone thought to store away a cruse of oil in the first place, long before. Someone anticipated a time when we would lose hope, when our individual light or the light of Judaism itself would seem like they were running out. So they gave us this story for us to find when we most need a story of hope. By standing up in the face of challenges of identity and moral choice in a modern world, our ancestors hid away a spark for us to find and then expand." So perhaps in the same way, our world stores away beauty and wonder, the very miracle of our existence, for us to find when we need it, for the times when the pain and the suffering are all too much. Perhaps the mystery of the world is not so much the existence of wonder and beauty, but the fact that it so often seems to arise in exactly the moment that we need it most. As we all go through life in this beautiful, terrible world, may we find moments of wonder and awe just when we need them, even in the midst of suffering. And may these moments help us to know that we will go on. May it be so.